You are standing in a kitchen that is not yours yet. The agent is talking. You are not really listening because you are doing arithmetic in your head, and the arithmetic is not working. You earn a good salary. You did the things. And you are standing there realizing that the people who owned this exact house 40 years ago earned less than you do and bought it anyway, without any of this fear. So you go home and you look it up. And here's the number. In 1985, a normal house cost about 3 times what a normal person earned in a year. Today, in a lot of cities, it is closer to 8. Same house, same walls, same roof. So what happened? The easy answer is that everybody wants a house and there are not enough of them. That is true. It is also the smallest part of the story. Here is the bigger one. Somewhere along the way, a house stopped being a place you live in and quietly became a financial product. And once that happened, the price stopped being about you at all. Let me show you the machine, one piece at a time. Start with the mortgage because almost nobody looks at how it actually works. You borrow $300,000. Over 30 years, you might pay back more than double that. Well, everyone knows that part. Here is the part they do not tell you.
The interest is front-loaded. In the first year of a typical 30-year mortgage, the overwhelming majority of every payment you make is interest, not ownership, interest. You can pay for 5 straight years and still own barely a tenth of your own house. Think about what that means. For the first decade, you were not really buying a home. You were renting money from a bank, and the house is just the collateral. The bank gets paid first. You get paid last. That order never changes. Now, before we even get to the mortgage, there is a step almost everyone is stuck on, the deposit. And the deposit has a cruel piece of math hidden inside it. Say a house costs $400,000 and you need 10% down. That is $40,000. So you start saving, hard. You put away $1,000 a month, which is genuinely difficult, and you feel like you are getting somewhere. But while you save, the house is moving too. If that house appreciates just 6% in a year, its price went up $24,000, which means the deposit you need went up by $2,400. So look at what actually happened that year. You saved $12,000. The target moved by $2,400. You did gain ground, but you gained far less than your bank statement says.
And in a hot year, when prices run 10 or 15%, the target moves faster than you can save. You do everything right, you sacrifice for 12 months, and you end the year further from the house than when you started. That is not a personal failure. That is a treadmill. Now, the next piece, supply. Because when people say build more houses, they usually assume that building is allowed. In enormous parts of most cities, it simply is not. There are rules that say this land may only hold 1 single-family home, not 2, not a small apartment building, 1. There are rules about how far the building must sit from the street, how much parking must be attached, how tall it can be. Each rule sounds reasonable on its own. Stocked together, they make the cheap kind of housing illegal to build. So the shortage is not a mystery. In a lot of places, the shortage is the law. Which leads straight into the third piece. Look at what actually gets built now. A builder has a fixed amount of land, a fixed pile of permits, and a fixed number of years fighting to get approval. If you can only build 1 unit, you will build the most expensive unit you can sell. That is not greed. That is arithmetic.
So the small, plain first house, the one your parents probably started in, mostly stopped being built. It was the lowest margin thing on the list. The ladder did not get harder to climb. Somebody removed the bottom rung. Now the fourth piece, and this is where it gets personal. When you go to buy, who are you actually bidding against? For a long time, the answer was other families. A couple like you, standing in the same kitchen, doing the same nervous math. Now, sometimes, you are bidding against a fund, an investment company that buys houses in bulk, pays in cash, skips the inspection, and closes in a week. You cannot beat that with a mortgage pre-approval. You are not a worse buyer. You are a slower one. And in a bidding war, slow loses. And notice what the fund is buying. It is not buying a home. It is buying a stream of rent. To them, that house is a bond that happens to have a kitchen. That difference matters more than it sounds. You and the fund are looking at the same building and seeing 2 completely different objects. You are calculating whether you can survive the monthly payment, whether the commute works, whether your kid gets into that school.
Your ceiling is your salary, and your salary has a hard limit. The fund is calculating what it can charge in rent minus costs as a percentage return, and its ceiling is not a salary. Its ceiling is whatever else it could do with the money. If bonds pay 4% and this house yields 6%, the house is worth buying, and it will keep being worth buying at a price you personally could never justify. So when you lose that bidding war, you did not get outbid by someone who wanted it more. You got outbid by someone doing an entirely different calculation with a much higher ceiling, using money that is not their own. Which brings us to the fifth piece. What happens to rent when the owner is a company? For most of history, landlords competed. Yours did not know what the building down the street was charging, so both of you had a little bit of guesswork, and guesswork is where your negotiating power lived. Now, a lot of landlords use the same pricing software. They feed in their data, the software looks across the whole market, and it tells them the number. And here's the thing about everyone using the same brain. They stop underbidding each other. Nobody has to agree to anything. They just all quietly arrive at the same higher number. Yeah, it is the same trick as the airline seat and the shelf tag. The price stopped being negotiated. It started being calculated. Now the sixth piece, and this one is almost invisible. It is called lock-in. Imagine you bought a few years ago and your mortgage rate is very low. Rates then double. Now think carefully about what happens if you sell and move. You would give up that cheap loan and take on an expensive one. Moving would raise your monthly payment, even if you bought a smaller house. So you do not move. Millions of people do not move. And every one of those houses that would normally have come up for sale simply never appears. The market did not run out of houses. It ran out of houses that anyone is willing to list. Now, the last piece, and it is the one that hurts. The story we tell about ownership. We say a house is the best investment you will ever make. But look at what you actually pay for that investment. Property tax, every year, forever. Insurance, which keeps climbing. Maintenance, which is roughly 1% of the value of the house every single year. A roof, a furnace, a water heater, and the interest, which we already talked about. Add all of that up, and a large chunk of what you pay is not building your wealth. It is just the cost of holding the thing. The house went up in value, yes, but you also spent 30 years feeding it.
That does not mean buying is a mistake. It means the sentence "rent is throwing money away" was always too simple. Paying interest, tax, and maintenance is also throwing away. It is just quieter about it. So, that is the machine. Interest that gets paid before you do, rules that make cheap housing illegal, builders who can only afford to build expensive, funds that outbid you with cash, software that stops landlords competing, and owners who cannot move even if they want to. Not one villain, 6 systems, all pointed the same direction. So what do you actually do standing in front of a machine like that? First, stop measuring the house in dollars. Dollars change. Measure it in years of your income. If a house costs 8 years of everything you earn before tax, that is the real price. And it is comparable across cities and across decades in a way that a dollar figure never is. Second, run the rent versus buy math properly and be honest in it. Take the mortgage interest, the property tax, the insurance, and about 1% a year for maintenance. That total is your true cost of owning. Compare that to rent. Not the sticker price of the house against rent, the cost of holding it against rent. Sometimes buying wins clearly, sometimes renting wins for years. The answer changes by city, and the only way to know is to actually do it. Third, understand what the interest schedule means for you personally. If there is a real chance you move within about 5 years, you will have spent that whole period paying mostly interest in transaction costs. Buying rewards staying put. That is the hidden condition on the whole deal. And fourth, look very carefully at the bottom rung, because that is where the last cheap housing is hiding. The older building, the smaller unit, the place 2 neighborhoods over that nobody is fighting for yet. The fund is not bidding on those. It wants scale and it wants clean. There is one more thing worth doing, and it costs you nothing. Find out what the rules actually are where you live. Who decides what can be built on a piece of land near you? In most places, it is a small local meeting held on a weekday evening, attended by almost nobody,
And the people who do show up are overwhelmingly people who already own homes nearby. That is not a conspiracy. It is just who has the time and the reason to go. But it means the supply of housing in your city is decided in rooms that renters and first-time buyers almost never enter. The single highest leverage thing an ordinary person can do about housing prices is boring, local, and unglamorous. Show up to the meeting where building gets approved or refused. Nobody makes a video about that because it is not exciting. But every one of those meetings is where the shortage is either continued or ended. None of this makes a house cheap. I am not going to pretend it does. The machine is much bigger than your budget, and no personal trick outruns a rule that makes building illegal. But there is a difference between being priced out and being confused. Confused is expensive. It makes you feel like you failed a test that everybody else passed, when what actually happened is that the test changed while you were studying for it. You did not miss the boat. The boat was quietly turned into an asset class. So measure in years, not dollars. Count the true cost of holding, not just the price. And when someone tells you the market is simply supply and demand, you now know the more useful question. Demand from whom?